My name is Bobby Herrera. I am the CEO and co-founder of Populus Group and the author of the book, The Gift of Struggle. Today, we're going to be talking about how to confront the bias that exists on both sides of social injustice, how to win any race, no matter what race you're in, despite how you feel the odds may be stacked against you, and perhaps above all, how to give with dignity.
Welcome back to part 2 of our delicious conversation with Bobby Herrera. He is the author of The Gift of Struggle. In part 1 of the show, we really talked about really where it all began for him and coming from a migrant family and what that meant to a kid and how it's not an either or. It's not or like, you go through struggle and everything's wonderful because it gives you all these gifts, or everything's terrible because it gives you such disadvantage. But actually it has both. And from there, it's about controlling your own narrative and controlling your own story. And at the end of part 1, by the way, if you didn't get to listen to part 1, go back and listen to part 1, because at the end of part 1, there was probably one of the best examples I've ever heard in a story form of understanding how to deal with and not let it control you, the issues around race and minority, or any other issue for that matter, and about deciding what the focus is. Very powerful. I highly recommend that you go back to it. As I said, Bobby's book is called The Gift of Struggle. You can find it on Amazon. We will give you out more links at the end of the show, and of course, we'll post all those in the show notes. But let's just come back here, because in the book, you open the book with the story of the bus, or the buses. Let's talk about that for a minute, because I think it's going to give context to where we're going to go and maybe be a good opening. So if you don't mind, Bobby, please sort of share that with us.
Yeah, that was a marker moment for me, Dove. When I was 17, my brother Ed and I, we were on a return trip home from a basketball game. And along the way, the team stopped for dinner. And we had just had a big victory. Everyone was excited. But as the bus goes rolling into this diner, I started getting a pit in my stomach because I knew what was coming. Well, when the bus stopped, everybody unloaded off the bus, except for my brother and I. At that point in my family story, we didn't have the means to play sports and afford dinner. And we were very accustomed to staying back on that bus. And a few moments after the team unloaded, one of the dads to the other players, he steps on board the bus. And as he's walking towards the back, he razzed me a little bit because Ed had outscored me that night. And then he said something to me, Dove, that I will always remember. He said, "Bobby, it would make me very happy if you would allow me to buy you boys dinner so that you can join the rest of the team. Nobody else has to know. All you have to do to thank me is do the same thing for another great kid just like you on this bus." And to this day, it's hard for me to explain the wave of gratitude that I felt in that moment. And I remember stepping off the bus that evening, Dove, and I had no idea what I was going to do outside of having the desire to raise my hand, which I did a year later to join the military. But I had no clue what I was going to do. But after that moment, I knew why. I would somehow, some way, figure out a way to create something that would allow me to pay forward that kind act to other kids like me who were born on the wrong side of the opportunity divide. That moment gave me something to believe in. It gave me hope I desperately needed. And even above that, it helped me understand that maybe someday I too could do something that matters. And it changed the course for me. And I that became the invisible force that drove me and ultimately fueled my entrepreneurial journey 15 years later. It was that kind moment from the bus that was driving me that 15 years later led to me putting all my chips on the table to eventually start my organization.
So that's a powerful story because, you know, particularly in the world we live in today, where people give money to the homeless while taking a selfie.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally want to go and kick those people in the under areas, but that's just me.
Mm-hmm.
It's my own
I'd help
bias.
you. I'd help you.
Exactly. You might lend a boot too. So, you know, I mean, that's not generosity, that not in my mind, at least.
Mm-hmm.
And the, you know, one of my life projects, it's called the Dignity Project, because I, like you, grew up very poor,
Mm-hmm.
and we got charity, and I hated it.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like it stripped us of dignity.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very in favor of giving. I'm very in favor of being a resource to people, but let's do it in a way that has dignity, not in a
Mm-hmm.
way that says, "Oh, I'm better than you.
Mm-hmm.
I've got better more than you." And the way that that man made that offer to you
Mm-hmm.
both, you know, allowing, you know, if you would allow him, right? That's dignity. What a spectacular example of, you know, when you told me that story the first time, I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I love that. That's a great example of somebody showing dignity. Were you, and I really have to ask you this, were
Mm-hmm.
you, you know, your 11th of 13,
Mm-hmm.
uh, the youngest kids in a large family tend to be little shits,
Mm-hmm.
because their older siblings, you know, they got the rough hand, and usually things have softened out a little bit. You
Uh-huh.
know, I've got a brother who's off the rails, who's, you know, he's my youngest brother, and, you know, I'm the eldest of 9. You know,
Uh-huh.
small family compared to yours, but you know, I was the one who was brought up with the rules.
Mm-hmm.
He was the one brought up with no rules. Were you always a good kid, or were you a little shit for a while there?
I was a little shit with a capital S.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
okay. So you're
yeah,
more of a big shit.
you know, and maybe even in bold. Like by number 11, my
Mhm.
parents were so exhausted that
Sure. Like,
they
yeah,
were like,
do whatever you
okay,
want.
is he
I'm
alive?
tired.
Is he alive? Is he coming
Yeah.
back? And you know, I also, you know, often joke around that I think that's where I got some of my entrepreneurial creativity, because at number 11, I thought my mission in life was, all right, what can I do or come up with that my parents haven't seen yet? And that's pretty difficult to do as number 11.
Sure.
So yeah, but
Yeah.
you know, my older siblings kept me in line. So
Well, what, you know, what I wonder is, did that? The reason I'm asking is, I wonder if that moment,
mhm.
with that man on that bus, I wonder if that changed your perspective at all about how you were being. That's what I mean.
Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting because you know, I was a pretty mischievous kid, but we were so you my dad was a, you know, I called him the Mexican John Wayne. He ran a tight show,
Yes.
and he, like, there was no room for you know, violating any of his protocol for how we were going to behave in the family.
Right.
So what it did for me though is, you know, there's an interesting backstory about this man that came on the bus. You
Mm,
know, he was a very successful businessman in the community.
mm,
And in the narrative that I told myself was that, hey, people like him, they don't see brown kids like me.
ah,
But with one kind act, not only did he teach me that was wrong, but he taught me that one of the single most important parts of leadership is seeing and encouraging potential. However, the way that he did it uh, demonstrated to me that he wanted more for me than from me. And so I felt this deep sense of responsibility to own that potential that he saw in me, because potential on its own isn't worth
waste of
anything.
time. Yeah.
And however, he, in a sense, handed me that ownership of that potential with that kind act, and completely reframed my narrative. And it just changed everything for me.
What I love about that is, you know, and what you just said in a subtle way, was, it's one of when I'm confronting meaning, and as you know, that's the basis of my work, confronting meaning and how we develop this anatomy of meaning and our own subjectivity around it. And there's a lot of justifiable talk about how there's biases against different groups. But it's important to realize that human beings are biased. Like, people say, well, I should be less judgmental. Listen, you're judgmental. Get over it. That's what you are. You just got to catch it. That's all. You just got to catch it. I don't care what color you are, you're biased. And your idea is to confront that. And what you just said was that man, in his way, gave you a way to see your own bias, that you saw him as somebody who wouldn't be interested in you. So, and people look at me and they go, oh, well, you must, you've no idea what my childhood was. You no idea what it was like to grow up in a ghetto. You can't say the word ghetto, Dove, you're white. Of course I can say ghetto. It's got nothing to do with color. It's got to do with a way of living that we were living. It was crime and violence and addiction. It was a ghetto. And so, you're asking people to confront these biases that are subjective in meaning, and not, just this dramatic, oh, well, white people don't like dark people, or no, hold on a second. There's bias within the bias. So there's white people who have a problem with people of color. There's people of color who have problems with people who are white. There are people of color. I'm married to somebody of color. And we've had many discussions about how the wrong shade of brown is the wrong shade of brown.
Right.
And there's a right shade of brown, which is closer to white, which is just insane, and then we go to Asia and we're in Thailand, or we're in another Asian country, and, they're selling skin bleach. And like, oh my God, the biases are inherent. And it's not about suddenly going, oh, well, we got to do this to confront them. Here's where it starts. We got to confront our own. And I think that when that act of not only generosity, but generosity with dignity, he never said to you, what's your bias against white blokes? He never said to you, what's your bias against rich white blokes? He never said, what's your bias against rich white blokes, entrepreneurs? He didn't say any of that. He gave you an opportunity to confront your own bias by giving you with dignity, showing generosity. Beautiful. Like, I would like to pat that man on the back. Beautiful, because that is the only way to do it. It's like, instead of making people wrong, just show them how they automatically are. And that's why I know I'm underlining it and I'm going on a bit, but it's like, that is so powerful. And I wonder how many leaders could confront that right now. Like, what is your bias about women? What is your bias against transgender or gay or this color or that language or this language or whatever it is that you might be dead wrong on? How could you confront that? Like, that is, and how could you confront it with dignity? Wow. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Humility is the secret of the wise, someone said. And the wisdom that he had to do it in that manner, I'm just so grateful for it. So grateful for it.
Absolutely. Now, I talked about in the beginning, because it's a big subject, we've seen 1 million people as part of the Great Resignation leave their jobs in the United States alone. And people go, yeah, well, it's really, it's happened in the UK. Yeah, it has happened in all the first world countries. But here's what you don't know. It's happened in China. It's happening in Vietnam. It's happening in both communist countries, by the way. There is a mass resignation. I believe it is an epidemic of meaning. I mean, it's people like confronting the fact that like, what the heck is my life about? What am I doing? And you're in the business of taking care of these non-permanent workers or non-residents oftentimes. And of course, there is the advantage of now remote working is a little more acceptable. But talk to us about confronting that at a business level. I know it's a little off subject from what we were talking about, but
Right.
this is, we talked about the gift of struggle, and this is a
Mhm.
struggle right now for many businesses.
Well, it's the number one challenge and struggle for any business leader, arguably in the world. I mean, it's far beyond just, North America. I
Yes.
agree with you. And Dove, I agree with you because, the experts, and I'm not necessarily sure who all they are, but, they said during this pandemic, 4 out of 10 people have completely rethought their livelihood. So half of the world has completely rethought what they want out of life. Another 1 out of 10 just cashed in their chips and retired and said, "Hey, color me, I'm out."
Yep.
Another 1 out of 10 started their own business, right? So that leaves the remaining 4 out of 10 completely overwhelmed, not knowing how they're going to complete everything that's happening as everyone else is off quitting, switching jobs several times over, and it's causing a lot of chaos for business leaders.
Yep.
And I don't believe that we're anywhere near any like sign of relief. Like we may see some relief coming in the early quarters of next year as more people like return to the workforce or some of the job hopping stops, but that's just speculation. Like settle in, because we're going to have to figure out not only what we do, but how we'll succeed. I think those are the two biggest critical questions that every business leader has to ask himself. What do we do and how will we succeed? And they're going to have to unpack that in this new environment so much more intentionally than they have in the past.
So what are you saying to, I mean, like I said, you're working with, the Fortune top 10, and these guys were big customers for you, and you were dealing with all these non-permanent employees, and in the past that was a problem with, like, well, how do we balance the culture with permanent employees and non-permanent employees? And now we can't even get them. What's your guidance to them?
Well, first and foremost, I want to make sure that people understand exactly, look, hey, do you understand exactly what the landscape is? Right? Because, I know you've had many other veteran entrepreneurs and, former military leaders on the call, but I'll ask them, hey, how are you managing this VUCA? Right? And VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it is out there at a level that can't even be comprehended right now. And so I'll slow the game down for them. And I'm like, do you understand the tell of the tape, using a boxing metaphor, like what the facts are? And more often than not, these business leaders, like, they don't truly understand what's happening in the demographics of the workforce. Right. So we'll unpack that. But then secondly, I was just at an event this last week in the Midwest, one of the largest, highly respected medical manufacturers. And they had over 100 of their supplier and partner CEOs there at this conference. And to the business leader, every single one of them, number one issue: labor, retention, attrition. And I think the two biggest questions that I ask them beyond that, hey, rethinking what do we do and how will we succeed, is, all right, how are you locking down your most valued employees? Like the ones that absolutely, positively, you can't be on the mountain without. How are you locking them down? And number two, walk me through every way you're going to start enhancing the employee experience. Because with the future work and with what's happening with remote work and, the way everyone's rethinking their livelihoods, most organizations are in a very reactive mode, rethinking that employee experience, because they weren't doing it very well before the pandemic to begin with. And so now they're doing it amongst chaos.
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of the challenge, and I've written a lot about this, and you and I talked about it before, I think that throwing money at the problem is not the answer.
It's not.
I'm working with a company right now. They have grown. They have doubled every 3 months in the last 2 years. So their growth is insane, but they can't keep people. They can't keep, and so they're throwing more money at them, and they're still walking away because they're burned out, and there's no corporate cultural experience of a community. And what's happening, they become really fodder. They're getting chewed up and spit out. And I warned the CEO on Friday. I said, if you don't change this, you're going out of business. The fastest growing company in your industry, and you are going out of business because they don't know where to go. They don't know what to do. And they think money is going to solve the problem. And it will for about 3 months.
Right. It'll help if you're lucky. Yeah,
if you're lucky, it'll stick around. Right. Okay, I'll stick it. I can stick it out for 3 more months because that will buy me the X, or that will pay off the Y. Right. But then they're like, I got nothing. I'm out.
Yeah, the pendulum is swung so much right now to the employee having more leverage on the financial side. So, I mean, let's not downplay that. And that does need to be addressed, and organizations need to look at that situationally. But beyond that, I'll often encourage leaders to ask themselves, it's like, hey, ambitious people need interesting projects. So how are you connecting your best and what really gives them energy? Like, what are their gifts that they bring to your organization? One, do you know them? And number two, are you putting them in positions to really amplify those and make a real impact? Because I'm certain that you and I have seen more leaders that don't understand that, hey, our responsibility is to give our people contribution, not only something from a meaning perspective to be a part of something bigger than themselves, but a way that they can contribute to the impact of organization. I believe most people genuinely want to make a contribution. Well, as a leader, you have to set up that platform, take money off the table best way you can, give them ways to contribute in a creative manner, and then keep doing that. Because if you don't, somebody else is going to.
Yeah, I think that oftentimes leaders miss the point that, which it's certainly becoming more real for them these days, which is understand this. You think your employees are there to meet your needs. And what you need to realize is, no, they're in a job to meet their needs.
Right.
And so if you're not meeting their needs, and I'm not just talking about financial, but the ones including you just talked about, which is interest and insight and ways to learn and ways to grow and mastery and community and all those things. If you're not meeting those, if you're not creating that opportunity for them, they will literally go somewhere else that pays them less for that, because that's the meaning of their life. Right. That matters more. So I love the fact that you're putting forward ambitious people want to do interesting things.
Right.
Ambitious people are not interested in tidying up.
They don't they don't want to do mediocre. They don't want to do mediocre work. They don't want to do insignificant work.
No.
Like, they want to be able to say, I did this.
Yep. And I did this. I was part of that. And I was part of the reason that came to fruition. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I also want to acknowledge that, that's easier said than done. It's like parenting, you have your best intentions to, do all those things that you imagine. And then amongst the chaos, you lose it on, in the fray of, trying to run a healthy family. But, leaders now need to understand, and we all need to get very intentional about looking at these wonderful people that are part of our community and sitting with them. They're asking themselves one question, like, what's my opportunity? We have to be able to sit down, and I call this exercise, let's give them the pin, right? Let's walk them up to the board. And I've done this exercise for years. Well, I'll walk them up to the board and I'll say, okay, what are your gifts to the organization? Like, tell me the things that make your heart sing, the things that give you energy. And then I'll say, okay, question number 2, based on you utilizing those gifts, what problems do you see that you could help impact in our community? So you have to create that safety that allows them to speak openly about that. And then 3, okay, if you disproportionately focused on applying those gifts, fixing those problems, what would that role look like? And they've already been thinking about this, but we have to mine that out of them. And then the next question is, okay, well, what are 2 or 3 things that you have to do in order for that role to be a reality? Again, that's doing what Mr. Teague, the gentleman that came on board the bus, like, that's the potential. Okay, how are you going to own your potential? Because I'll give you all the support you need, but if you're not willing to do these 2, 3 things that you said you have to do in order to get there, I can't help you.
But in giving them the pen, you're doing exactly what you did with the kid you invited on stage to race.
That's right.
You're asking that person to control their own narrative.
Right.
Right. Rather than saying, well, there's no opportunity here.
Right.
How do you know?
Uh-huh.
Well, because they haven't offered me anything. What are you, a beggar in the street? Get off your ass, ask for what you want. Well, I don't know. Well, if you don't know what to ask for, how could they offer it? Because if they did, you wouldn't recognize it. So you have to design it, and then you confront it, right? And we as leaders have to make it safe for them to do that. That's the other side of it. It's two-sided, but it is two-sided. It's not one side on, oh, it's up to the employees. Well, let them come forward. Well, you don't make it safe for them to come forward. Right. Or it's up to the bosses because they have all the power. No, it's up to you to control the narrative and decide, do you want to win? If you do, rock on. Otherwise, back off and get your own sandwich.
That's it. It's like that. I use a corny metaphor, like that seesaw on the playground. It's like you have to balance it out, right? I don't just want to be the kid on one side of it that is expected as an employer to give you all the answers. Like, life doesn't work that way.
No.
Right. It's an and, not an or. So I want you to participate in your own rescue here, and let's do this together. And I can help create this for you. You have to own it. And by the way, along the way, I'm going to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear, because I care about you. So
Bobby, this has been
I think that's missing.
Yeah, I think you're right. This has been a fabulous conversation, and I sincerely appreciate you being with us. We are at the end of part 2, and before we go, of course, I'm going to ask you to make sure everybody knows how to find out how to reach out to you and capture your resources. But before I do that, I want you to give our listeners, to give our leaders, to give our viewers one simple, short piece of practical advice, something you would ask them to go do right now, preferably as they're listening, or certainly within the next few hours, so they could take this and make it real, because information is worth the hole in the donut. Transformation comes from the application. So what's that one piece of advice?
Well, I'd share my very simple leadership philosophy, Dov, in that, we all struggle, but every struggle teaches us something. That's the gift. And leadership is sharing those gifts with others. So the question I would ask these leaders to consider is, how well and intentionally am I doing that with those that I'm leading? And I think that would be an interesting self-assessment exercise for leaders today.
I think that's a great piece of advice, because I think we get shy about that. We think it's either big-headed to say, well, here's what I've learned, or we think it's kind of weak to mention that I failed in some way. And it's both of those things are absolutely wrong. That's great advice. Thank you so much, Bobby. Again, please tell our listeners, our viewers, where they can find out more about you and all your wonderful resources so they can reach out.
Well, first and foremost, all hail the underdogs, Dov. It's been an honor, been a pleasure, brother. I can be reached on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. My website's bobby-herrera.com, where I share a lot of the wisdom that's been shared with me. And my community is what I call Populus Group. It's at populusgroup.com. So
fabulous. And as I said, we'll make sure that we post links to all the places that Bobby just mentioned. We'll also post a link to Bobby's book, The Gift of Struggle, which you can find at all the usual outlets. And we'll make sure we post a link to that too. It has been a pleasure and honor, sir. Thank you for being with us. And for you, dear listener, remember, you can hang out with other conscious leaders. You can chat about this episode or any of past episodes inside of our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. It doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're just working at a fraction of your capability. To find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or your organization, simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com, because unified actualized meaning is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness in all individuals and companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about how you have been given the gift of struggle. And maybe you need to understand what those gifts are and then share them with the people that you serve. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning to reach the next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.